Hello, my name is Merryn McKinnon and I work for the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science at the Australian National University here in Canberra. In 2019, I saw a report that said women were quoted in 33% of science news articles in the Australian media. I was a little bit surprised by this figure. I hoped it was that high, but it didn't seem to be quite consistent with other studies that I'd seen. When I looked at the report a little more closely, it turned out that that number was calculated based on a sample of only 19 articles. I wanted to get a more accurate picture. So over a period of about 5 years with postgraduate students, we collected articles from 18 different print and online news outlets in Australia. This included 3 specialist science-focused outlets. So we really wanted to see who was talking about science, who was writing about science, and what kind of science they were writing about. We used a constructed week method, which meant we took 2 weeks worth of randomly selected dates from each year. And this was considered enough to give us a representative sample of the kinds of stories that were being published. We excluded Sundays because Sunday papers here in Australia tend to have a slightly different format and focus, and we wanted to keep things consistent. The years that we covered, which were 2018 to 2022, also included COVID. So we made sure that we excluded any COVID-related articles just to make sure that we were making consistent comparisons for each year. At the end of all of that, we'd collected just over 2,500 articles. We coded all of these for journalist gender, and that was male, female, or unspecified, and the same for sources, those who were directly quoted, so actually given words in quotation marks, or indirectly quoted where what they said was paraphrased. The majority of the articles that we unearthed came from 5 different outlets, and so they were responsible alone for about 1,600 articles. As we looked across the whole sample, though, first of all, we looked at, well, what kind of science are people writing about? By far, health and medicine was the most popular topic in all of the science articles that we saw. Probably because health and medicine is so relatable to everybody. We're all wanting to know how we can stay healthy, live longer, lose weight, get fit, all of those kinds of things. The next most common topics were space and animals, insects and birds. And that was consistent across the entire 5-year period. When we get to who's writing about these stories, our findings were slightly different to other previous studies. Within the context of the Australian print and online media, women are almost on parity with men when it comes to those who write about science news. This is significantly different to global studies and other earlier studies that look at media reporting more generally, not science specific. So that was a positive. That's a good news story as far as we're concerned. Interestingly, though, when we look at the different topics that people were writing about, quite a few of the topics that other studies deemed to be very male-focused and masculine-focused, like engineering, energy supply, geology, Australian women are writing about that as well. So that gender difference in terms of who's writing about what articles or what topics wasn't necessarily the same. Where we do start to see some significant gender differences is in who talks about these scientific topics. So going back to health and medicine, for example, 50% of the sources that were quoted in health and medicine related stories were male. In and of itself, that seems okay. Women were quoted in 36% of those stories. However, if we look at health and medicine as an occupation in Australia, 75% of the health and medical workforce are female, and that includes those working in universities. So why then, in a female-dominated profession, are men more likely to be quoted? And this was consistent across every single topic, across the 5-year average of every article from every outlet that we collected and coded. Women were quoted in 45% of stories. This is good. It's better than our 33% that started this whole investigation. However, each article could include quotes from more than one source. So you could have some articles quoting males and females or just a generic genderless researchers. So while women were quoted in 45% of articles, men were quoted in 76% of articles, while unspecified researchers were quoted in 29%. So what we have then is a media landscape that has very much the dominant male voice. So science, technology, engineering and maths is something that is spoken about predominantly by men, even in female-dominated disciplines. There's something else going on here. We looked at the relationship between the gender of the journalist and the gender of the source. And running statistical analyses, we found that the relationship exists where male journalists are significantly more likely to quote male sources sources and use ungendered or unspecified sources in their articles. Female journalists are more likely to quote female sources in their articles. So while we are seeing that we are getting some parity in who writes about science and the kinds and a lot of diversity in the sciences that they write about, the dominant voices are still male. If we keep track of the diversity of the people that we are putting forward as the public face and public voice of the work that we do, then we're better able to keep track of sharing those opportunities and ensuring that our representations are as diverse as possible.